time.
Okay, and is it time a function of distance?
Not necessarily. If you're sitting in traffic, it's not anything to do with distance.
Okay.
It's a congestive area.
Okay, is Highway 210 congested?
To the south, no, it's north of the site it is, yes.
Okay, but with respect to this particular site, what I'm specifically asking you is, do you have an idea of the average trip that this facility would make?
I would think it would be in a 25 to 30 mile radius.
Okay, and do you have an idea how large the town of Angier is?
As far as the population of Angier?
No, as far as size.
No, sir, I do not.
Okay. And so would it be fair to say that the facility in Lillington could service the surrounding area of Angier based on that average trip that you've described?
I can't say what the owner of another company will do.
But I asked you whether it would be fair to say that they could.
I guess they can do anything they want to.
Well, I'm asking you a yes or no question, sir.
I can't answer that question. I don't know whether it's fair to say what they will do.
So you don't know whether or not the facility in Lillington that does essentially the same thing as your plant, proposed plant would do?
Yes, it can do it.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, I just want to make
Yes,
sure
sir.
for the record.
Yes, sir.
That
Whether they will do it or not, I do not know the answer to that.
do you know if they service Angier or not at this point?
Not to my knowledge.
You don't know whether they do or
No,
not?
sir.
Okay. So you haven't checked that? You haven't checked?
No, sir.
So you haven't done a business plan or a model as
I
it
have
relates?
done a business model. I have been paving in Angier.
Okay, but do
In
you,
optimum temperatures, transferring asphalt from Fayetteville, south of Fayetteville.
so you've been able to transfer asphalt to Angier from Fayetteville?
I have,
Okay.
at certain times.
All right.
But it's not something I routinely do.
And what do you consider to be the optimum temperature?
The 90s,
90 degrees?
90 degrees.
So that would be optimum temperature for transport of
Yes,
liquid asphalt?
not liquid
Well,
asphalt.
asphalt in,
Yes, sir.
what type of truck again would it be?
In a dump truck,
In a dump truck, okay.
variable sizes.
All right, and would 90 degrees be the temperature that the asphalt would have to be maintained at?
No, sir.
Okay, so what temperatures,
It depends on the mix type.
okay, and what type of mix type are we discussing with this particular plant?
Multiple mix types.
Okay, can you give me an idea?
You have your base course, your binder course, your surface course, then there's three different types of mixes in each one of those mixes.
And so, is there a minimum temperature level in which you would not,
Around 40 degrees.
about 40 degrees? So,
Yes, sir.
So basically, anything above 40 degrees is fine,
Depends on the mix type.
depending on the mix site.
That's correct.
All right. And as a general rule, travel from Fayetteville to Angier is possible during
It is
optimum.
possible, but it's not feasible.
But have you done it?
I have done it
Okay,
to satisfy customer needs.
okay. And has that been, is that in the regular course of your business?
No, sir.
So it's only been on occasion that you've done it
Yes, sir.
from Fayetteville
Mhm.
to Angier, but it has been done?
It has been done.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything for the board?
Mr. Price?
Yes, sir. Mr. Raynor, your current locations that you have are where, sir?
Cumberland County and Brunswick County.
That's Fayetteville and
Leland.
Leland. At these locations there, Mr. Raynor, how's your safety on those sites? Have you ever experienced any conditions?
No, sir.
None.
No, sir.
Okay. Are you familiar with what they call lockout, tagout?
Yes, sir.
Do you ever have any issues with those?
No, sir. We have a lockout, tagout section inside of our facilities at both plants.
Okay. Rigging equipment. What kind of rigging equipment do you use for material handling?
For material handling,
Mm-hmm.
well, we use aggregate, so it's contained in the bucket, so we don't use any rigging equipment for that.
Okay. And do you ever do any excavations?
On site?
Yes.
No, sir. No, sir.
And you know there's a requirement for, protective systems around your,
Yes, sir.
you don't have, never had much issues with that?
No, sir. The facility has that. It comes from the factory with it around.
Do you do any work besides the plants, like on job sites and so forth?
We place asphalt on the roadways, parking lots, subdivision streets, commercial restaurants.
Do you have crews that do
Yes, sir.
that, or you sub that out?
No, we do it in-house.
In-house?
Yes, sir.
And you've not never experienced much with that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Leland, I have a question.
Okay.
In reference to, I'm sure you must know with your two plants in Leland and in Fayetteville, where Ms. Chuck provided us with this aerial map of location, you said Austria or somewhere, I can't remember. Australia. With this plant, particular plant, which she knows about, sitting directly beside homes and restaurants. Your facility in Fayetteville and Leland, what is sitting next to your plants in those two locations?
There is a industrial area in Fayetteville,
Okay.
and residential and commercial in Leland.
Okay. All right. And in proximity to that residential, could you give me an estimate? Is it a football field like this picture here, or are we talking
The
a half
football
mile?
field.
Football field. Okay, thank you.
Now, is it my understanding that you manufacture for yourself, you got your own paving crews? Is that
That is
correct?
correct.
But you do sell outside to other subcontractors or other contractors?
That is correct.
So how many vehicles are you going to have on site, as far as hauling away?
It depends on the workload. You know, as
I mean,
the
is this
market
something where you
grows,
have them parked right on site, or do you call them in from Fayetteville, different trucks coming in, depending on your?
It'll be a combination of that.
And I take it you're gonna be out here, being on highways and possibly new highways and stuff like that, so more you have, the more trucks you're gonna bring in.
That
And
is
the more
correct.
active your plant's gonna be.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So your truck's gonna be coming in and out of the plant all night long? Or is it a certain time that they're gonna be coming in, or,
That's not normal, but it'd be project specific.
okay,
You know, if the town had a water line break and they needed asphalt to open a road back up, then we would be available to open up and provide them mix
okay.
and do emergency repair work.
And there's gonna be a lot of roadways, being constructed in the next few years that, especially here in the local area, that we're gonna need asphalt out here for highways, if they choose to do it with asphalt instead of concrete, which I don't think the, concrete is.
That is correct, and also for the residential and commercial growth in this area.
Any further questions? Okay.
Do you have any monitors on site that would register the decibel level of the facility that will be in use?
We do not have monitors on site, but she can speak to that. That they have done studies and monitored them from plants that'll be that's comparable to this one that we're proposing.
But you don't have them on site to determine what the decibel levels would be?
No, sir, we do not currently.
Would you like to direct your question to Catherine Choate?
I'm more than happy to direct my question to Ms. Choate.
Okay.
We don't manufacture the monitoring systems, and we do not provide sound monitoring means on our equipment. The monitoring that we do is more for temperature and emission purposes.
Okay, so, and I guess I'll direct it back to you, so, back to Mr. Raynor. So, Mr. Raynor, to your knowledge, you don't have a way of determining what the actual sound and decibel levels would be in your facility?
I have not checked that.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions?
Yeah, you ain't gotta come back to Mike. I do have a question though. My understanding, and when he was talking about temperatures a while ago, and you said 40, 90. If it's 40 degrees and it reaches the site, aren't you gonna get rejected?
If it's like a base course mix, their minimum temperature is 35 degrees to place that.
So 250 is not the,
No, sir, it's the ambient air temperature. Now, they check the actual mix,
mm-hmm.
but if it's a base course mix and it's in a certain distance, we can hold that temperature.
Thank you,
Because there's more aggregate and less liquid in it.
thank you.
Okay. Thank you, sir. All right, any further questions? And
Okay.
what is your presentation, please, sir?
So my presentation is going to be related to concerned citizens in the community specific. I have a specific number.
Okay, well, I just want to be sure that there's nothing else. Is that the presentation for the applicant?
That is the presentation for the applicant at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. All right, Mr. Bowen will entertain your information.
Thank you so much. Again, my name is Attorney Stephon Bowens. This evening, I'm going to be calling a number of both fact witnesses and an expert witness. If it please the board, I am going to read into the record two statements by two individual residents who could not be present this evening. Well, certainly they could not be present, one of which was because of health reasons. And so, if it please the board, I'd like to read their statements into the record.
Okay, let me inquire about that. Are they factual in nature, or are they providing opinion?
It's a little of both, to be honest. But it is the resident statements, and I would submit to the board that the board may take it as is. And the board, certainly it's in the board's discretion to determine how it would be utilized.
Dan, I believe we can instruct the board not to take into account opinion within the statements, or
Well,
should we allow statements? We're not allowing online statements.
two potential issues here. One is, and of course, the board can take any evidence in and give it whatever value it deserves. But I am slightly concerned, and I saw, Attorney, do you have objection to that?
Yeah, for the record, Mr. Chairman, I would object to those written statements that's specifically prohibited by North Carolina General Statute 160D-603, which provides that written statements may not be received from persons who are not here and available for cross-examination. The only thing that the board could receive would be the name and address of the person who provided the statements, but the statements themselves are inadmissible.
Okay.
In this instance, we would contend that specifically with respect to Ms. Carol Clark, she is not able to be here because of physical disability, precludes her from being here, which precludes her from wearing a mask, which is required for purposes of participating in this proceeding.
I
Ms.
have a
Carol
feeling
Clark.
we're going to have adequate testimony all over. Dan, am I?
I think, given that this is a quasi-judicial proceeding, and there is a right of cross-examination for both parties, I would be, it's the board's determination, but I would be inclined to not allow written statements, particularly given the statutory authority presented, and given that the applicant would not have the right to cross-examine based
Right.
on written statements. Now, the other option for the board would be to,
Hold their statements over and allow, assuming that there is going to be a continuance because of the number of persons, those statements could be presented at a later date.
Okay,
depending on whether
Right.
we
if
finish
that's the
tonight,
case.
but
Without objection from the board, I'm going to rule that those statements are inadmissible at this time. If there is any further hearing, continuance of the hearing, and they are able to come in person, then we would certainly entertain the testimony.
May I, at least for the record, I'd like to put their names in the record so that you would
That'd
know
be
who the
fine.
parties are. And I would also ask that the record be noted that I've objected for the record with respect to the decision of the
Well,
chair.
we're not exactly a court proceeding, but
understand.
I understand what you're saying.
Thank you. And the first resident is Miss Carol Clark. She lives at 40 Circle Tree Lane in Angier. And she's less than 2/10 of a mile from the proposed site. The second individual are Christine and Tammy Gage, and they live at 151 Quail Ridge in Angier, North Carolina, 27501 as well. So for the record, their names are presented, and their information certainly we would submit should be before you.
Okay, go ahead and proceed.
Thank you.
With your other material.
So at this time, I would like to call my first witness, who is Ms. Carlotta Reyes.
Okay, Carlotta Reyes. And we note that you have been sworn.
Yes.
So Ms. Reyes, can you state your full name for the record?
Yes, Carlotta Reyes,
And where do you live, Ms. Reyes?
7206 NC 210 North in Angier.
Okay, is that within the city limits or?
Yes.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
No, anyway, that's not here to there, but okay.
So Ms. Reyes, I can help with that. Where is your home in relation to the proposed site?
It's adjacent to the site, right next door.
So were you one of the two residential properties that were identified by Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Okay.
And can you tell me, how long have you lived in your present address, at your present address?
Since mid-October of last year, of 2020.
And where did you previously reside?
Durham, North Carolina.
Okay. And is there a reason you moved to Angier, North Carolina?
Yes, we were looking for a little bit more open space to be able to enjoy the outdoors with family, with my dogs, just have more relaxation that I can't find in where I was living in Durham.
So is it fair to say that you moved to Angier because of the community, the type of community and lifestyle that Angier had to offer?
Oh, yes, sure.
Okay. And who resides in the home with you?
It's my husband and my father-in-law,
Okay. And what is your husband's name?
Pedro.
And what is your father-in-law's name?
Pedro. Pedro Sr., Pedro Jr.
Okay. Now, with respect to moving to Angier, at the time that you moved to the location, was the property around you zoned RA30?
Correct, yes.
Which essentially means that it would be agricultural and residential use?
Correct, correct.
And so was that a significant factor in you making a determination to move to Angier?
Yes, for us it was. We were just wanting to look for living in more farm area. So that Angier was the first place I thought of that.
Now, can you describe to me the types of uses that are presently in your community?
Yes.
Surrounding your property?
So we have farm, well, as of right now, farm to, if I'm looking out to the street, farm to the left, which is where the proposed site is. Then to the right of me is Johnson Properties, the overflow lot, which sometimes they do auctions or some musical events. And then to the right of that is going to be the mulch area. We have some businesses, daycares, dog facilities, some restaurants, getting closer into town, schools, churches. So it can be pretty dense as you're getting closer into town.
So, in your area, are there other, like, subdivisions close by?
Yeah, so right after the Johnson Property building, kind of across the street, if you take a left, there's houses down in there, and then, several streets after that, there's more houses down in there. I've gone to explore a little bit, but.
Okay, so there are a number of subdivisions nearby.
Correct.
And with respect to proximity to the proposed plant, are there any other subdivisions, let's say, within a third of a mile?
I believe so, yeah, I
Okay.
believe so,
And are there additional subdivisions within a half a mile?
yes,
And are there additional subdivisions within a mile?
yes.
Okay. Now, with respect to the businesses, I think you've listed some of them. For example, you mentioned that there are churches. Is there more than, when you say churches, is there more than one church
Yeah.
in close proximity?
I believe so, so I would say 2 or 3,
2 or 3 churches?
yeah.
Okay. You mentioned the auction facility, and is that the Johnson?
Johnson Properties, yes.
Okay. Are there other business interests, like, for example, is there a sign shop?
There's a sign shop going to the north, I think, whatever the other way is.
Okay. Now, and all of these are on Highway 210, correct?
Correct.
Going north?
Correct.
Correct?
Mr. Bowen, could you get a little closer to the microphone? People online are saying they can't hear you.
Okay. All of these business interests in the area that you described, are any of them, to your knowledge, classified as heavy industrial?
No,
So this would be the first heavy industrial use in the area, is that
correct,
correct?
correct.
And that would be immediately adjacent to you, is that
Correct.
correct? Okay, and what concerns does that cause you with respect to the location of the proposed facility?
Well, I have health concerns in my family, personal health concerns that we have to maintain. Me personally, I had cancer about 4 years ago, which I'm gladly overcame that. But apart from that, I've had childhood asthma, and I'm still prone to having respiratory infections pretty frequently, just from exposure. So getting a simple cold will turn into bronchitis and pneumonia. I'll have deep, heavy coughs that will last for months, and sometimes I can cough so heavy that I can throw up. So it's a challenge. And apart from that, my father-in-law has pulmonary sarcoidosis, and he's very sensitive to any kind of chemical smells, fumes. Like, we're even mindful about what we use inside the home. And he has severe dementia, so any noises that startle him, if he's having a bad day and doesn't know where he is, that's pretty big impact for him. So the only, one of the reasons we moved out here was because he can enjoy the outdoors a little bit. He can't do much, but he can sit outside. And my concern is if the plant is in there and it's constantly running, then that's pretty gonna kill his quality of life altogether. So, just,
Well, is it just a quality of life issue for your father-in-law?
yeah, so for him, it's gonna be quality of life, his health, any kind of progression with, any of the sarcoidosis, piece of the scar tissue just feels like heavy in his chest, and it's just layered issues, within the household that I'm very concerned with having that next to me. Also the noise, the trucks coming in and out, especially if there's some things that are gonna be run at night. You know, I work from home, so we're home 24/7. I know, you know, that a lot of people are working from home nowadays, so we don't leave the house during work hours. And, you know, sleep is very important for health. So, that's a concern.
What type of work do you do?
I work for Biogen, Alzheimer's Division, in patient services.
And so you say you work from home?
Correct.
And is it your plan to continue to work from home?
Yes.
Even after COVID?
Yes.
Okay. And so, would that mean that you would have concerns about noise?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And with respect to that, as it relates to the proximity of your home to the facility, based on your review, having lived there in the community since October of 2020, is that particular use in harmony with the community?
No, I don't believe it is, especially if the adjacent properties are residential agricultural, and there's still quite a few of them. And respect to all the other businesses, there's no other business this heavy that has the possibility of producing noxious fumes, noise. I don't feel like it fits within the character. And before moving here, I just want to say that I did pay close attention to what the comprehensive plan was. And there's, at the bottom of page 27, I didn't print it out because I figured you could access it online. But on the bottom of page 27, it clearly states that clean industries with no noxious side effects, pollutants, or hazardous materials will be allowed. So that's it.
So is it fair to say that you are concerned
Yes.
about the health risk associated with the plant being located immediately adjacent to your property?
Correct.
And you also have some specific health concerns that make that even more relevant than, say, the average citizen. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that would be true for your father-in-law as well, Pedro Sr.?
Correct.
Okay, I don't have any other questions for you. Is there anything else that you would like to say?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to kind of add that in the process of this decision, I think each person has to take in mind if you were the one that was going to live next to the plant. So if at any point there's any doubt whatsoever you would have with your family's safety and well-being, then there shouldn't be any doubt about what your decision should be.
Now,
Thank
when you say there's no doubt as to what the decision to be, what is the decision?
To reject the proposal.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Race. Any questions from the board?
Ma'am, when you bought your home 6 months ago,
Correct.
now, of course, some of the properties are RA30 around. Did you think it was going to stay RA30 the whole time you were going to be there? Basically, since you you have a auctioneer, every so often behind you, making a lot of noise, and you
Well-
got, traffic is out on 210, and already a lot of traffic.
Right. Yeah,
And, did you think it was gonna stay that way?
I did, but this is the first time for me. I move out to an open area, so I just assumed it would be. I just considered it a working farm, you know. So, yeah, so I personally thought it would be. Now I have heard the auctioneer, and I actually enjoyed listening to him. I heard him in one of his auctions, and I thought it kind of charming, actually, because I've never heard one before. So that actually doesn't bother me at all.
Well, I know that, beautiful home you have, it was a drawing point, so, I'm not gonna, I just, think if someone goes, not what I think, when you looked at purchasing the property, it should have been some bills out there saying, hey, this is not gonna stay like this long. 'Cause
Oh.
especially the way Angier is growing.
Right, yeah, I didn't even consider that. I just thought it was a working farm. I just thought people kind of retain their farms, and that's what they do. I didn't even think about it would be changing to something commercial.
Well,
Not to this extent, anyway.
Okay.
Any further questions?
I have a question, but I don't know if I have, I'm just gonna ask and you tell me if I can ask it or not. You know, it's farmland. Farmers spray pesticides and all that, so does that ever affect you? I mean, did you not take that in consideration when they're harvesting and stuff like that? They spray pesticides.
No, I did not.
Were you aware when you moved there that the bypass was gonna be within a half mile or less than a mile from you?
Not within a half a mile, no.
And-
I had heard, you know, just from looking over stuff that it was going to go in somewhere. I didn't realize it was this close.
Ms. Reyes, you have said that your father-in-law and some other members of your family have some pre-existing conditions. Have you spoken to doctors about this and they made any recommendations or they told you anything?
Yeah, I have not. My husband possibly has because he works over at the hospitals at UNC, so he's in communication with his father's physician, but not to my knowledge.
Is that it for this witness?
Yeah.
Ms. Reyes, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Well, may I
Appreciate-
ask a
yeah.
follow-up
Oh.
question to your question?
Okay.
With respect to the question about knowing what was coming to the community, you said you looked at the comprehensive plan, and isn't it true that the comprehensive plan at the time that you moved did not contemplate a heavy industry being in that area?
Correct, correct.
And so, isn't it also fair to say that a heavy industry, and an intensive use such as an asphalt plant, was not a consideration, in light of the light industries, and facilities that were there?
That's correct. That's correct, not to this level.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
May have.
Okay, who's your next?
There may be
Do you
some
have
cross-examination
rebuttal?
questions.
Yes.
A few questions.
Okay, yes. Be sure to come close to the microphone.
I will.
People online are having problems hearing y'all.
Sure. Good evening, Ms. Reyes. I've shown you what's previously been marked. You're good?
A little
Okay.
closer to them, I think the fact is that's so far behind the podium.
If y'all would just try to lean in a little bit.
Just get closer to the microphone. We should have two microphones, but we don't have them right now.
Sorry. Ms. Reyes, I'm showing you what's previously been marked as Exhibit Number 1, which has been introduced. And Mr. Bowens asked you some questions about proximity of other residences and churches and things of that nature to the subject property. Specifically, I'm looking at page 2 of Exhibit Number 1, where it's showing physical characteristics. Do you see that there on Exhibit 1?
Yes.
And can you point to where your house is on this particular, okay? Now,
It's right at the upper corner next to 210.
thank you. So can you identify, I think you mentioned 2 or 3 churches. Can you show me where?
Sorry, let me look at this.
Yep.
So, don't think they're on this radar. There's probably like, there's one
And
way out
please
here.
indicate for the record what you're
Yeah, so
saying.
this
Yep.
is kind of a,
I'm sorry, can you show to the board where it is you're pointing? Where the closest
so, yeah, this is my house. I know that there's a church like, that's right over here.
Okay. So there's not one within what's being shown?
Not in that box, not that I know of. I don't see a box.
Okay.
That's kind of small.
And Mr. Bowens asked you about the distance to other residences. Did you go out and take measurements as to how far these other residents were that you were testifying to
Well,
earlier?
I went on the GIS and did a 1-mile radius, and there's approximately 134 residences.
Okay. But as far as road mileage from the subject property to the other residences that you testified to previously, being within a half a mile and a mile and things of that nature,
Correct.
did you go out and measure that?
Not measure, but like, for example, here where there's the Johnson property, right next to that's a residence. So,
And so
where that is.
as a part of your testimony, did you go out and take the measurements? Okay.
No, correct.
All right, thank you. And at the time that you purchased your home, Mr. Johnson's industrial park was already across the street and zoned as an industrial park, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And I'm very sorry about your father-in-law's diagnosis, but I need to ask a couple of questions.
That's okay.
You provided some testimony regarding noxious fumes. Do you have any education, training, or experience in what constitutes a noxious fume?
I do not.
Okay. And you testified about issues regarding hazardous materials. Are you an environmental scientist or environmental engineer, or do you have any education, training as to what constitutes a hazardous materials and what impact, if any, that it would have on your family?
No.
Okay. And I believe you said your father-in-law's diagnosis was pulmonary sarcosis?
Sarcoidosis.
Okay, thank you, I apologize. Are you a pulmonologist?
No,
Do you have any medical training?
I do not. My husband does.
Okay. And you were testifying regarding noise and what impact you thought that might would have. Are you an audiologist?
No.
Do you have any forensic audio training?
No.
So the opinions that you expressed in your earlier testimony about the negative impacts that you believe that would be to you and your family regarding noise, fumes, and all the other things you testified to, these are just your opinions, is that correct?
Well, to some extent, I mean, anything that's sensitive within the house, like there's a fragrance of some sort that can cause a flare-up for him. It can be that we use some sort of cleaning agent and he just doesn't react well. Anything that has any kind of smells to it, we have to kind of clear it out. So it's just by experience noises. If he reacts to it, I see it. So am I a trained person? No, but I know his reaction.
So it's your opinion that you think that it's a possibility that,
I'm gonna object to the form of that question.
Well, again, we're not a formal court, but certainly we're looking for factual testimony.
so is she allowed to answer
Yeah,
the
you
question?
Yes.
still ask the question.
I'm sorry, yeah,
So, yeah, it's opinion by observation. Yeah.
thank you, ma'am, I
You're welcome.
appreciate that. Any further questions at this time?
Okay.
If I can just follow up with respect to that cross and do a little bit of redirect. Now, how long has your father-in-law, Pedro Senior, been living with you?
For 10 years.
Okay. And so you and your husband have lived with his health conditions for that period of time, is that correct?
Correct.
And so, it's not just your opinion as it relates to, how different factors affect his disabilities, but rather it's based on your experience as well, is that correct?
Correct.
And as it relates to, the proximity of other residences within your area, have you driven around the community?
I have.
And so you have a good idea of what other subdivisions are in your community?
Correct.
And is the location of other subdivisions and other business interests within your purview to know?
Yes.
And that's based on your experience driving in the community? And is it also based on your GIS search of
Correct.
communities around?
Yes.
And I believe you said that with respect to residences within a 1 mile radius of the facility, that was approximately 34 homes? Okay, and, give me 1 second. I'm gonna show you what's gonna be marked as Exhibit 1.
Why don't you use A so we can distinguish it from the other exhibits from the other attorney?
I will mark it as Exhibit A, and I have copies for the board.
You have enough for everybody?
Yeah. That should be marked as Exhibit A. So can you tell me about this 1 mile this map?
Sure. I mean, I just went online and put, you
You
know,
went online where?
a GIS, the Harnett County GIS.
You went to the Harnett County GIS?
Yes, correct. And I just put in the, you know, where the location was, where I live. And then I marked it to do a 1 mile circle. And then it put the little drawing on there. And then I could filter for residences versus, businesses or industrials or vacant, you know, that sort of thing. And so when I, filtered it, then what was left was 134 residences within that radius.
So, again, your testimony is there are 134 residences within a 1 mile area of the proposed site.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct.
We would offer Exhibit A as evidence in this map.
Without objection, received.
Any other questions?
How many homes did you say that was?
100, well, I'll let her say it.
134.
Where did you live prior to moving out there?
Right near Briar Creek, so 1101 Nichols Farm Drive in Durham.
How many,
It was like in a subdivision.
I'm curious, what subdivision, so, because I'm very
Grove Park.
familiar.
Grove Park.
Grove Park? Isn't the area up there, I think there's an industrial park up there, the World Trade or something like that? They have a lot of congestion,
located?
noise and everything in Briar Creek.
There's a lot of shops in Briar Creek. I don't know.
Yeah, but if you go further on, a little bit on down,
Like near the
by your
airport?
subdivision, on the backside, like, close to the, T.W. Alexander, there's a lot of businesses with trucks and heavy equipment and everything going through that all the time. That never affected your father-in-law?
Not in our subdivision. Like, he never left our subdivision, so we never had any of those
Okay.
on a daily basis. It wasn't on a main road.
Any further questions? If not, thank you, Ms. Reyes.
Two quick follow-ups, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, move it on.
If, since you conducted.
Get close to the mic, please.
Yes, since you conducted this research yourself, Ms. Reyes, are the yellow dots on Exhibit A what constitutes residences?
I believe so, yes. Or my, plots of land, and then I would filter. So then, like there was like an Excel spreadsheet, and then I could filter from that. So this may include everything, and then in the spreadsheet, you could filter for what the type was.
Well-
So all these are like plots right here.
Okay, well, this dot right here in the center, that's your home, correct?
Correct.
And then,
And that's, I guess, resident and residence.
so the bluish white lines indicate plots of land, like across the street is an empty field, correct?
Correct.
So the yellow dots are where they're the actual residences that you testified to earlier, correct? All right. So within the immediate vicinity and all the adjoining properties, for the subject property here, there's just your house and one other house right here
Oh,
and
there's some
two
here.
down here,
And
right?
some here too, and some back here.
So most of these 134 are way out on the periphery of this 1 mile radius that you drew, correct?
Within the 1 mile radius, that's
Okay.
correct.
And can you show me where on here in relation to your home where the bypass is going to be built?
I think it's gonna be right here, I think,
Yeah?
in that farm.
Back to this, in that, I don't know that the board is gonna be able to tell, and glean where she's pointing to on the map. And so I'm a little bit concerned.
If you will,
I can have her approach the board with the exhibit if that's
yes,
helpful to the board.
if you know, then
Yes,
you're
ma'am.
free to point it out to us.
And let me just add, as a general matter, the board is gonna take evidence into consideration and give it the weight that it, so in a quasi judicial proceeding like this, we're still, not as formal as a court, so, generally, questions will be allowed unless it's totally out of bounds, but if she can approach, maybe the board could
Yes,
see a
ma'am.
little bit better.
If you don't mind, if you could.
I think we can pretty much take notice of where it's gonna, Yeah.
That's very good.
And I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Yeah. And I don't have any further questions.
Okay.
So, I think from what I heard when I drive, wherever I see the stakes, I think it's this plot of land right there, right there.
Thank you,
that
ma'am.
right?
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am. Thank you. No further questions.
okay, good enough. Call your next witness.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I call Mr. Michael Collins.
Michael Collins. Has he been sworn?
Yeah, oh, yes.
I was actually sworn outside, but I'll swear again.
Okay.
Okay.
Double check it here. Okay. All right. I'll take your word for it. Well, it doesn't show that he was sworn. Do you know?
Everybody on that list has been sworn, Mayor.
Okay, all right. I'll check you off. Let's try to do it the right way.
Mr. Collins, can you state your name and address for the record?
Sure. My name is Michael R. Collins. I live at 5821 NC 210 North, which is approximately 1.1 miles from the actual site. However, I'm here representing my father, Colin R. Collins, who owns the property immediately adjacent to the site. It is to the south. It's been in the family for probably 80-plus years. It's been a farm in continuous operation as a farm for approximately 90, 100 years.
And what type of farming activity goes on the property?
Typically, it is soybeans, wheat, sweet potatoes. The whole farm's planted sweet potatoes this year, and the farmer who is farming it is rented out, is moving more towards produce in his operations.
And how many acres is this farming operation?
It's 34 acres total, but all of that's not in farmland. There is some wooded area and some ponds. However, the part immediately adjacent to the subject property is all agricultural.
And with respect to the farming operation on the property adjacent to the proposed site, are there concerns that you have related to the proposed heavy industrial site?
Absolutely. Heavy industrial is radically different than anything in the surrounding area. But also, a quick Google search will come up with cancer-causing toxic air pollutants. And there's a long list.
Chairman, I'm gonna have to object. There's been no foundation laid that he has a qualification to get testimony as the stuff that comes off the Google.
And the board is cautioned that we are only required and entitled to listen to factual testimony.
Understand.
And so the board may have to weigh that testimony and decide what weight it has.
Okay, so absolutely I have concerns.
And what are your concerns?
Concerns are that it could be a negative implication for the agricultural operations, and that it is not consistent with the surrounding uses.
Okay. And the surrounding uses being?
Residences, light businesses, and other agricultural operations. I think agricultural operations border the property on two sides. Residences border it on two sides. And I believe Mr. Johnson's auction yard borders it on one side. So I think there's a total of 6 adjacent properties, 2 of which are residences.
And at least your property is one of the 3, or your family property is one of the 3 properties that were identified by Mr. Sean Johnson earlier during his testimony as one of the adjacent RA 30 agricultural uses.
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Now, were you present when the applicant, in this case, Mr. Ryan and his environmental engineer said that essentially there were no harms associated with the asphalt plant?
I think I might have been outside listening to it on the webcast at that
Okay.
time.
And when you were listening to it, did you happen to bring a source of complaint today as it relates to the concerns regarding asphalt plants?
I did. I have a news article published relative to Leland.
I think that's a little far, Mr. Bowen.
I'm sorry?
That's a little too far.
Well, Your Honor, if you will, indulge me for a moment, and we'll get to a point.
Okay. Again, the board is instructed that it will have to make its own decision as what weight to give the testimony.
Exactly. And, but the testimony, just so that I can make the record clear, the testimony was there were little or no concerns about the operation of an asphalt plant near communities. In fact, their expert showed an example of an asphalt plant in Australia beside a Burger King. So we would ask the court, or ask the board to take notice of this article in the Star News. Can you read the title of the article in the Star News?
The article,
All right.
Go ahead and read it.
asphalt plants neighbors complain of noise and pollution.
And is that particular plant associated with this developer?
Your Honor, Mr. Chairman, I'm gonna object. The testimony of our witnesses was based on personal knowledge and, training and qualifications as an expert. This is clearly hearsay, being an out-of-court statement that's being offered for the truth, submitted, and it's inadmissible in this proceeding.
While we're willing to give some leeway, I think this is over the limit. So,
I'm gonna object for the record. I'm gonna ask that it be taken in and, if this matter goes further, that it be included in the record for purposes of, being able to, create the record on appeal. If you're not going to hear the evidence, because the applicant in this case said that there are no concerns related to asphalt plants. And there were no concerns, and there was even a question asked by a board member as it relates to whether or not asphalt plants, have any issues with respect to noise and pollution. So it is clearly relevant when this particular applicant is making that statement in this board, that if there are people who have evidence related to concerns, that those concerns be heard.
and
If I may.
Dan, advise me.
And you can take judicial notice of, in this, as
Well,
a
we're not.
quasi-judicial notice of the article.
If I may, as a general matter, while hearsay is not something that the board can make their decision on, I think probably the best practice is to allow the testimony and give it the weight that it is due.
And that's what I've been trying to say. So, we will note that there is a newspaper article that talks about noise and other matters. Where is that located?
This is the residential area that the applicant referred to as across from his Leland plant.
Okay.
All right.
So, yeah,
All right,
I think the board can hear that evidence, put it into the record, and give it the weight that it is,
Okay.
that it is due.
Fair enough, fair enough.
Go ahead. So what is the general crux of the article?
General crux of the article is that the neighborhood says that the plant does cause problems in their neighborhood, and the comments here from the residents is many people are looking to sell or rent their properties. I'll quote one line. It says, "One symptom of living next to an asphalt plant is insomnia. Residents of the Brunswick County Fletcher Estates say, and the constant hum of the asphalt operations is a slow push toward insanity." In another line, they say, "The smell is the hardest part. It's like a fog of odor."
With that, I only have one copy of Exhibit B, which is the Star News online article dated September 4th, 2014 at 10:43 a.m.
Okay, give that to the clerk.
Just again, Mr. Chairman, for clarity of the record, I object to the prior testimony and object to the
We receive your objection.
Not done?
You're not done. Is there anything else that you want to express as it relates to your concerns regarding the facility? I think you've already talked about your concerns as it relates to its proximity to residents and agricultural use. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you've also discussed issues as it relates to whether or not that proposed use fits within the community as it relates to harmony. Is that correct?
Correct.
And is it your belief what is your belief as to whether or not it is in harmony with the community?
My belief is it's a heavy industrial facility placed in close proximity to residences and in a light industrial area, and therefore not keeping with the zoning, which you're aware, because we're under a special permit here, not keeping with the zoning and not keeping with the character of the area.
Okay,
I have no other questions.
all right, thank you. Any other questions from the board, or?
Sir, you said you were, you have a farm, or you,
My father owns the farm.
your father owns the farm?
Right.
And-
Collins can't be here tonight. He is not ambulable at this point.
And on that farm, they use a lot of pesticides, herbicides, sometimes the excessive fertilizer that drains, so you got a lot of chemicals used on the farm, right?
I wouldn't say a lot, enough maybe to control a particular pest that interrupts the production of, say, a sweet potato or something like that, but certainly nothing that would cause the sweet potato to be caustic or harmful to people.
Yeah, well, I lived on the farm for many years on the farm, and I know a lot of chemicals and stuff are used out there, just like, and we're not going to condemn farms for this. They're going to keep on raising vegetables and food for the country,
Yeah,
but we can't do away with the farms
right.
and stop them.
I would make a further comment that anything that's applied is not applied 9, 12 hours a day, 100, 200 days a year. It would be a application maybe once a month or so during a relatively confined growing season.
Well, I think every industry has its downfalls, and but if I had to weigh the difference between the farm pesticides and what I've heard from expert witnesses that this plant's going to be putting out, sometimes I think I'd rather go up there and smell the fumes from this asphalt plant than I had the farms, because I've been out there with.
Let's move on.
Advise the board, you know, let's wait until all of the evidence has come in before
Expressing an opinion.
expressing any
yeah.
opinions.
I agree.
There's still testimony to come. I know none of y'all have made up your minds, so let's make sure we,
Well, I apologize for that. I was just trying to show that both.
I
right,
understand.
this is your opportunity to ask questions. I
Right.
think any comments can wait until the
Okay.
conclusion.
And Mr. Collins, please understand, we're trying to do this the right way, and the law is fairly clear, and we don't mean it anything personal.
I certainly understand that, and I don't take any, objection.
Okay. Thank you so much for your testimony.
Mr. Bowen, I don't know if we can even ask questions about it. When were you presented, when did you find out about this article? Today?
Yes.
Have you done any research to see if Brunswick County has unified their development ordinance or anything, or in regards to the complaints that the residents are making?
At this point, I have not, but I don't know that that's relative to the question of whether or not there's an issue of noise.
Right.
Or whether or not there's an issue of pollution, which the residents clearly say there is, which is in contradiction to the direct testimony of the two individuals, both their expert and, the plan.
Correct.
Okay, let's move on. What's your next witness? Thank you, Mr. Collins.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay, go ahead.
That's okay. Good evening, Mr. Collins. Just have a couple of quick questions for you. So, the concerns that you personally expressed about the possibility of the asphalt plant being next to your father's farm, were noise? Is that one of the concerns? One of your concerns?
Not noise, no.
Okay. And it was the risk to agriculture? Was that
Yeah.
one of them?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any education, training, knowledge, or experience that you could testify to as to what risk to agriculture that this presents?
other than, reading, published articles, no.
Okay. So it is simply then your opinion that this could potentially pose a risk to the agriculture on your father's farm?
Correct.
Okay. And with respect to Exhibit D, the news article, you don't have any personal knowledge regarding noise, fumes, for the Leland plant operation, do you?
No, I do not.
The only knowledge that you have is what you've read out of this news article, correct?
Correct.
And are you aware that that news article was in 2014?
Yes.
Okay, and were you aware that that is immediately after this plant first opened?
Yes.
Okay, and did you find any other public news sources from the date of this article in 2014 to the present time regarding any concerns regarding the operations of this particular plant?
Actually, I didn't have time to do extensive research due to the close proximity of the previous meeting and this meeting.
So that would be,
No.
you're not aware of any, correct?
Not aware of any,
Oh,
correct.
Thank you, sir. That's
Thank you.
all.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Collins. Mr. Bowens, what's your next witness?
If I could, I want to take a moment. The witness is still outside,
Okay.
and let me render him.
I believe there's room to seat his or her, him or her. I think that's probably.
Mm-hmm. Where do you wanna go?
I got room for another one.
Arthur, I think we're gonna suggest that people handhold the mic. So why don't you take it off and put it on the podium there? Apologize for there just being one mic. Mr. Town Manager, we need to fix that problem. We're running late here. Are you ready to proceed, Mr. Bowens?
He's outside.
I assume they hear me out there. Good idea.
Thank you, Arthur.
You rock.
Yes, he does.
Okay, Mr. Bowens, call your witness, please. We're running long here.
Another witness, unfortunately, the witness that we proposed
Okay.
is not available. They ended up leaving because of the length of time.
Hold the microphone in your hand, please, sir.
Yes, sir. So, at this point, I'm going to call Mr. Gary Kasdorf.
Gary, what? Now, excuse me.
Kasdorf?
I see him, I'm sorry.
My first name is
Carey.
Carey,
I'm sorry, Carey.
Carey.
I
just like
apologize.
the town of Cary, Kasdorf.
Mr. Kasdorf, welcome.
Mr. Kasdorf, you've already been sworn in, correct?
I-
Yes,
Okay.
yes, he has.
So
This works better when you hold it like that.
There you go.
So for purposes of this, I'm going to ask you your name, your
Okay,
full name, and your address.
all right. My name is Cary Kasdorf, and I currently reside at 302 Annandale Drive in Cary, but we are under contract to purchase a new home at 108 Broadleaf Drive in Mill Branch subdivision, Angier, North Carolina. So I know it seems a little misplaced, but I have a prepared statement here that,
Hold on, I'll ask you a question.
oh, you asked the questions, okay.
All right, and with respect to your prepared statement.
And please
I'm-
hold the microphone, Mr. Bowens.
Okay, I'm sorry. with respect to the prepared statement, I'm going to mark that as Exhibit C, and I'm going to ask you some questions for it, but I'm going to go ahead and provide it to
Okay.
the body.
What happened to B? Did you say C or B?
C.
What happened to B?
B was the news article.
Oh, okay.
Agree to take.
Bob, there you go, buddy.
Sorry.
So, Mr. Castor, you wrote a letter under oath on April 26th of 2021. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And if you could, is this a true and accurate copy of the letter that you wrote that is marked as Exhibit C?
It is.
And do you want to read your letter to the board?
I do.
Okay.
Once again, we'll receive it for the purpose of later consideration by the board as to its proper weight, because it contains some opinion material.
Yes, it probably does have some opinion.
Okay. So if you would just read your letter to the board, and then I'm going to ask you some questions related to it.
All right. To the Board of Adjustment members, my wife and I are opposed to an asphalt plant being built in Angier. We care about this for we hope to become residents of Angier, a town we have decided is a good place to invest our dollars and to live an enjoyable life. Recently, we were under contract for a home in Neals Creek Farm. We fell in love with this home and the neighborhood. After living in Cary for 40-plus years, home and neighborhood would have to be very special for us to leave Cary. What a surprise to learn about the asphalt company planned in a close proximity to the Neals Creek property. We were still in the due diligence period, and we walked away from the purchase, losing $5,000 to the seller. Losing $5,000 now is better than what an asphalt plant will do to our health and to property value if we decide to go ahead and close on the sale. In addition to our loss of money, your constituents, our sellers, lost a buyer. Presently, their home is not on the market. We understand what such a plant will do to property values because I was a builder and developer in Cary for 40-plus years. My wife was a realtor and manager for Fonville Morrissey Realty for 30 years. We know the deleterious, noxious use of property, such as an asphalt plant, greatly affects the use and values of residential properties. As we both know, it is people in residential communities that make a town, not industrial businesses. Another reason to not have an asphalt plant on Road 210 is the increased amount of heavy, large truck traffic. The confluence of asphalt plant truck traffic, the new bypass traffic, and the normal traffic all coming together there on James Norris Road is going to cause a challenge to ingress and egress to that area. In addition, all those trucks will be bad for the road pavement, think potholes. Now we are wondering if the Angier Town Leaders Long-Range Plan for Angier is to be an industrial center or a residential and light commercial community. Would you please speak to the long-range plans for Angier? Respectfully, Carrie S. Kasdorf.
And that statement is a notarized statement, is that correct? It is. And with respect to that statement, I'd like to ask you a few questions. You said that your occupation for a number of years was a builder, is that correct?
Builder and developer, yes, sir.
Okay. And can you tell me your experience in some of the subdivisions that you may have built, or other items that you have built?
Well, there are quite a few. They go back a long time. One of the last ones we did was a rather large townhome community on Avon Ferry Road as you leave state. It was 171 townhomes with a clubhouse, community center. And that was a real successful one. Sunset Point in the outskirts of Holly Springs. I mean, Churchill Downs, Summer Winds in Cary, just goes on and on. Over the years, well over 1,000 homes.
And so during the course of your time as a builder, you've had the experience of developing site plans, have you not?
Oh, many.
And you've reviewed site plans?
Many.
And when you are making decisions with respect to locations of communities, do you take into account what the property is zoned as when you make your initial assessment of the properties?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. And with respect to that, based on your experience as a builder in the community, would you look at the particular types of uses that would be adjacent to the residential properties that you typically build?
Yes, absolutely.
And would you take into consideration when building residential communities what other uses were there?
Oh, sure. An example in Cary years ago, there was a junkyard right in the middle of Cary, and it became a brownfields site because the ground was saturated with antifreeze and motor oil and gasoline, and it took many, many years to get that to where it was developable. I didn't in particular build that area, but I was instrumental in helping getting it to a buildable position. There was another source on the other end of town that was a fertilizer distributor and pesticide distributor, and they washed out their barrels right there on that site, right in the middle of Cary. And for years, that the EPA had that as a hot site, couldn't do anything with it, and then the brownfields legislation came in, and that was then capped over and converted into an industrial site, not a residential site. But these are the kind of things that can happen and crop up. And the town of Cary, when I moved there and we started working, had about 5,200 people. Now the latest polls show it's about 160,000 people. So I've been involved with a lot of that kind of stuff and seen the good and the bad, but mostly I think the net result is, as far as Cary goes, even though you have a lot of people, is quite good.
Now, with respect to your experience, what's the name of your business?
Highland Construction.
Okay.
Not Highland Paving, Highland Construction.
And with respect to that, would it, in your experience, would it be compatible with a residential use to have an asphalt plant directly adjacent to residential development if you were developing it?
If there was an asphalt plant there, I would not develop residentially next to it.
And so, in that same vein, would it be your professional opinion? Now, let me back up. Were you a licensed contractor?
I was a
general
licensed unlimited contractor.
Okay. And as a licensed unlimited contractor, you certainly would know the market as it relates to development of residential sites. Is that correct?
That is correct. I still am a broker, have been since 1975, and my wife is a still licensed broker. And between the two of us and developing, we were very careful about properties we bought and what could be built next to them and what could be rezoned next to them. And it's a slippery slope when you're developing next to unknowns.
But typically, would it be a good business interest for development of residential units next to a heavy industrial facility?
In my experience,
But
Agreed.
he is an expert as it relates to residential building.
Has
You need
not
to
been
tender him
qualified
as
as
an
an
expert.
All
expert.
right, then I'm happy to tender him as as an expert. You've already described your experience and the fact that you were licensed as a as a general contractor, and you have more than 40 years' experience. Is that correct?
that is correct.
And that you've built numerous subdivisions throughout North Carolina, primarily in the western Wake County area. Is that correct?
Primarily, yes.
Okay. At this time, I would tender Mr. Kasdorf as an expert witness
Well,
with respect to.
I tend to allow that. The only problem is you had expert testimony before he was tendered. So I would suggest that the board cannot listen to that testimony as expert testimony prior to tendering.
That's fine, and I'm happy to go back through it.
It's getting late, but I understand.
And if the board wants to take notice of it, then that's fine. If not, I'm happy to move forward with asking him the same questions again.
I think the fact that he has been tendered as, if the board accepts him as an expert witness, I think the board can consider his testimony. It is within the realm of that.
Make a motion.
I
I make a motion, we accept him as an expert witness.
Okay, by consent of the board, do you want to do that? Okay, yes.
And just for clarity, Mr. Chairman, he was tendered as an expert as a builder,
Correct.
correct?
Mhm.
That's
A
what you
residential
got,
builder.
A residential builder, I don't have any
And de-
objection to him.
and
being
developer.
an expert,
A builder and developer, I think.
And developer, he said, yep.
and developer.
Okay, but for the limited purpose of as a builder and developer. Okay.
And so the board can consider opinions within that context.
Exactly.
And so I'm gonna ask you again, Mr. Kasdorf, as a residential builder and developer, would it be advisable, in your opinion, to grant a special use permit in the context of a property for an asphalt plant next to a residence, based on your opinion?
Not in my opinion, it would not be
I don't
advisable.
object as to the form of the question. I don't mind him giving an opinion if he wouldn't develop property next to an asphalt plant, but asking about the granting of a special.
Hypothetical,
use permit
yeah.
of that nature is not appropriate.
Do you
Okay.
wish to ask the question again?
Would you develop a residential facility, or, excuse me, a residential development next to an asphalt plant?
Not at this time, no.
Okay. And in your opinion, as a residential developer and builder, would it be appropriate to site a facility next to an existing residence?
I'm gonna have to object as to the form of that question as well as.
I'm not sure what you're asking.
In other words,
I think you can only give opinions as to what he would do as a residential developer.
one of the
Okay.
factors that you would look at in developing would be what properties are zoned by you. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And if you purchase property and adjacent to, for development as a residential development, and that property subsequently a asphalt plant was proposed to be there, do you believe, in your opinion, that would impact the sales of your residential units?
Oh, absolutely it would, to the negative.
Okay. And that's based on your experience as a builder and developer? And is that also based on your years as a real estate, in real estate since 1975?
Yes, yes indeed.
He was just qualified as a real builder and developer.
And in this particular case, you made a conscious decision not to purchase property in Angier, and again, where was that located?
In Neal's Creek, and I just had my 70th birthday, and at my age, my wife and I weren't willing to get embroiled in any kind of negativity in purchasing a home in that subdivision. So we just backed off, and it was worth losing our due diligence money to go somewhere else, which we did. And we liked that home over there, but it just was something we didn't want to just waste our time and energies trying to defeat something when we didn't have to. So that's why we went to the other end of the area. Hopefully nothing will come in over there, but we do want to make Angier our home. We think it's a great place, and we just feel that asphalt plant is probably not the best thing to put right there.
And do you feel as though, as a part of your assessment in whether or not to purchase that home, was your assessment based on whether or not that particular use was in harmony with the community?
Right. It would have been deleterious in our opinion. Yeah.
Okay. And I have no other questions.
Any further questions from the board? Okay, if not, thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Guest.
Maybe cross-examination.
Oh,
Okay.
Ms. Kasdorf, and your, I'm sorry, thank you. And your Exhibit C, you provided a number of opinions in there, including opinions regarding property value and traffic. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. You're not a licensed traffic engineer, are you?
I am not.
You're not a licensed civil engineer, are you?
I am not.
You're not a licensed certified appraiser, are you?
No.
You're not a licensed certified realtor or broker, are you?
Oh, absolutely I am.
Yeah. And when did you, tell us about that?
1975.
You became a broker? Yes. Very good. And you practiced as a broker for how long?
Till this very day.
And you sell your own homes that you develop?
We had on-site sales. My wife was a manager at Fonville Morrissey. We sold all our properties.
Very good. Apologize, it's hard to keep the microphone in your hand. In the properties that you developed, you testified that it was a slippery slope, not knowing what would be built next to you. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And have you ever bought a piece of property where an adjacent property got rezoned after you purchased it?
Not after we purchased it, but we were involved in the development of 12 Oaks, and the nuclear plant played a big role in our decision of whether to get involved or not. And as it turned out, it wasn't that big of a detriment because it's doing very well. But when you look out and you're cutting trees and you look out and see that cooling tower, you say, did we make a big mistake? So, you know, sometimes you take these risks, but in general, you try to steer away from them.
Sure. But sometimes there are things that happen.
If you don't own the land, you can't do anything about it.
And that development has continued to do just fine?
Well, it's suffered for a while, but now it's on fire. It's doing good.
Well, that's great. Now, you provided some testimony that you wouldn't build a subdivision next to an asphalt plant, correct?
I would not. I wouldn't take that risk. My bankers wouldn't take that risk.
And that's, well, I'm gonna object as to what your bankers would do or not do,
Well,
because you can't testify for them, but that is based on your opinion as a developer and experience,
And
correct?
experience, yes.
Yeah. You don't have any scientific or objective, evidence or testimony that a subdivision wouldn't sell next to an asphalt plant, do you?
I've never had that experience, so I really can't say. I just say what my experience would tell me not to get involved.
Okay. And you're aware that there's subdivisions that have been built next to asphalt plants all over the country?
I don't know personally, but maybe, sure.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all the questions I
Okay,
have.
thank you. Apologize for not giving you the opportunity quickly. Mr. Bowens, what else you got?
I have, at this point, I would like to call Mr. Gary Anderson.
Mr. Henderson, would you state your name and address, please?
Yes, my name is Gary Anderson. I live at
Anderson.
345 Kenneth Creek Drive in Angier.
And Mr. Anderson, did you hear the testimony of Mr., the previous testimony of Mr. Castor?
Yes, I did.
And are you familiar with the situation with respect to the purchase of the property by Mr. Castor?
Yes,
Okay. And was a communication directed to you regarding the purchase of that property by Mr. Castor?
excuse me
Was
again?
a communication directed to you regarding the purchase of a property by Mr. Castor? Not that the communication was sent to you by Mr. Castor, but whether there was a communication.
Yes.
And who directed the communication to you?
When, you mean from Mr. Kasdorf? Oh, that was Mr. David Stevens.
Okay. And is that a notarized statement that you received from Mr. Stevens?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And can you tell me when you received it?
I received it this afternoon.
Okay. And what is the date on it?
The date on it is April 27th, 2021.
Okay. And is the correspondence directed to you?
Yes, it is.
And is the correspondence signed by David Stevens and notarized?
Yes, it is.
And how do you know Mr. Stevens?
I only know Mr. Stevens through Mr. Kasdorf.
Okay. And Mr. Stevens directed this communication to you tonight?
Yes, he did.
And was that related to matters related to this issue?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And is what I've marked as Exhibit D a true and accurate copy of the letter to you by Mr. W. David Stevens?
Yes, it is.
I would ask that the letter from Mr. Stevens be moved into the evidence.
Or we'd have to see it.
I object, Mr. Chairman. It's no different than the prior written statements that are notarized, but they're not here to be cross-examined.
Is this a written statement from
It
him?
is a written statement from Mr.
From
Stevens
this witness?
directed to this witness.
It's not from this witness, it's from somebody else that was given to him.
Yes.
That's no different than the prior ones that,
I think,
It is, it's analogous because it is notarized to an affidavit, which
it's,
can't.
But
I don't think
notarized.
that qualifies it, because there's still the right of cross-examination, but to the extent you're asking him questions about this is not introduced as testimony, but you have questions for him based on him receiving this document, I think that's appropriate.
And may I publish this to the board, at least give them copies?
I
of it?
believe I need to see it,
Yeah,
if you want me to rule on it.
Here it is.
and I'll advise the board, based on the rule about written statements, this cannot be considered as testimony in and of itself, but it may be that the witness has testimony related to this document that it would be appropriate.
Fair enough, I agree.
So to the extent this is marked as Exhibit D, board will give whatever way it deems appropriate to it, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Based on the advice from the attorney.
Now, Mr. Anderson, did you have any communications? Did I give you a copy? You did, thanks. Did you have any communications with Mr. Stevens regarding this correspondence?
Yes, I did.
And what communications did you have?
I told him that I was a friend of Mr. Kasdorf and asked him if he would provide me some information, a document stating that he had the offer on his property from Mr. Kasdorf, and that Mr. Kasdorf backed out of the real estate deal because of the proposed location of the asphalt plant.
And is this notarized statement a more memorialization of that conversation that you had with Mr. Stevens?
Yes, it is.
And is it correct that that property was located at 72 Clover Ridge
Yes, it is.
in Mule Creek Farms?
Yes.
And based on your communication with him and based on his notarized statement, is it also correct that the buyers, in this case, Mr. Kasdorf and his wife, backed out of the purchase of that property?
Yes, they did.
And they terminated that agreement on April 19th?
Yes.
2021?
Yes.
And that was because of the possibility of the asphalt plant being located near the property to be purchased?
Yes, it is.
And was that the substance of your conversation with Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
And is that the substance of the letter that is before, the notarized correspondence that is before the board today, dated April 27th, 2021?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Now, you also reside in Angier, do you not?
Yes, I do.
And your property address again?
345 Kenneth Creek Drive. We're
Yeah.
approximately 1 mile from, by road from the plant.
Okay, so by road, you're 1 mile away from the plant?
Yeah.
Okay. And with respect to that, do you also have concerns about the location of the asphalt plant in that area?
Of course I do.
And what are your concerns?
My concerns are, we moved to this house about 2 years ago. We loved the town of Angier. We loved the area. My wife did not want to live on a major highway, so we are probably a mile off of 210. And we just love the area, and we would look forward to moving here, and we've loved living here since.
Okay. Now, with respect particularly, are you familiar with the surrounding area,
Yes, I am.
where the site is located?
Yes.
And are there uses that are as intensive as an asphalt plant in that area?
There's nothing even close. We have daycare centers just down the road. We have, and that's just about to open up. We have funeral homes. We have a warehouse for batteries. We have a couple of auto repair facilities, 3 of them actually. Nothing that's producing, you know, I hate to say chemicals or anything like that, but nothing that's dealing with anything like that, nothing heavy.
Okay. And you are aware that by definition, an asphalt plant is at least under the ordinance for the town of Angier, is a heavy industrial use?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And so do you believe that is in harmony with the nature and character of the community?
Not even close. It's unbelievable that some people might consider it to be conducive or in harmony with the rest of with the area.
Okay. Do you have any other concerns or issues that you'd like to articulate?
No, I mean, we're all concerned about potential contaminants blowing in, depending on which way the wind's blowing. That's probably one of the biggest concerns for us.
Along with the, is that, it is also, you're concerned about contaminants, potential?
Contaminants.
And are you also concerned about the change in character in the neighborhood?
Yeah, just the additional traffic from, I forget how many, potential trucks driving in and out he had mentioned during the day, but the quantity it's high.
Irrespective of traffic, are you concerned about whether or not an asphalt plant matches the characteristics of the neighborhood?
Yes, I'm very concerned.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Pope?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Anderson. I'll be brief. With respect to Exhibit D, which was the statement that you brought in here, tell me what your involvement is between the transaction between Mr. Stevens and Mr. Castor.
My only involvement was that I'm the one that recommended Carrie come to the Angier area and move here. We both lived in the Raleigh and Cary area, and I told him this was a great place to live. And I'm unfortunately the one that had to give him the news that I'd heard about the asphalt plant coming to town.
So you're not a realtor or a broker involved in that transaction?
No, I'm not, just a friend.
You're just a friend of Mr. Castor's?
Yes.
And you went and asked Mr. Stevens to provide you with this statement?
Yes, I did.
To bring it here this evening?
Yes.
And Mr. Stevens didn't come himself?
Mr. Stevens didn't have the ability to make it here tonight.
Okay, so he's not here?
This was last minute, as you can see.
And he's not here?
Right.
Okay. So you expressed a couple of concerns about potential contaminants blowing in the wind. Are you an environmental engineer?
No, I am not.
Do you have any education, knowledge, training, or experience about what pollutants, if any, are caused by an asphalt plant?
No, I just know that when I drive by one and you can smell it when you drive by, it scares me. It makes me concerned. What's in that smell? What's causing that smell? So that's my concern.
So you can give personal testimony as to what you smell, but you don't know that anything in that smell is a pollutant, do you?
Correct.
Okay. And you mentioned briefly about additional traffic. You're not a civil engineer, are you?
No, I am not.
You're not a traffic engineer,
No.
are you? That's all. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Any further questions from the board, or? Okay, Mr. Bowens?
Members of the board, I'm now going to call Mr. Alonzo Lonnie Morris.
Glasses on and take my mask off.
Alonzo
Morris.
Have you been sworn in, Mr. Morris?
Yes, I was sworn in outside.
Okay. Is it Lonnie Morris?
Pardon?
Yes.
Lonnie Morris, okay. Got it. Thank you.
Mr. Morris, can you state for the record your name?
Alonzo Morris,
And do you go by a nickname?
Lonnie.
And do you have any special training or education?
I am a chemical engineer, retired. I graduated from Auburn University Auburn, Alabama, in 1975.
Okay. And can you tell me where you have worked as a chemical engineer?
In the 38 years I've been a chemical engineer, I've worked in petrochemicals business. I made ABS plastic, acrylonitrile, butadiene, styrene plastic. I've handled elemental phosphorus and converted it into dentifrice for Colgate. I made phosphoric acid for Coca-Cola and RC, and I've made Roundup.
Yeah, hold the mic a little bit closer, please, sir.
Hold the mic to your, yeah, so
And-
we can
and-
hear better.
and Could you tell us what your address is? Mr. Bowens, he did not state his address.
Okay, if you could say your address.
1012 Wheeler Drive
Okay, thank you, sir.
Andrew?
in Angier.
Andrew, okay. Sorry, proceed.
And I'm going to ask you to make sure that the record captured your experience. I'm going to ask you these questions again very quickly, okay?
Okay.
Your education.
Chemical engineer, graduated Auburn University, 1975.
And what type of degree did you receive at Auburn University?
Chemical engineering degree.
Okay. And where have you worked since graduating?
Graduated, worked for Monsanto in petrochemicals. I made ABS plastic. I moved to Augusta, where I handle elemental phosphorus coming in from Soda Springs, Idaho, and converted it to phosphoric acid and calcium phosphate for Colgate. I also worked in Roundup in Fayetteville.
Okay. And what positions did you what positions did you hold while at Monsanto?
Naturally, I started out as level 1 engineer. I progressed to manufacturing technologist, which is the highest level engineer can achieve in manufacturing, technically wise. And I got lateral to operations manager, which I didn't want to do, but I did anyway.
And in that experience, have you had, in your professional experience, worked with handling and processing of chemicals?
Yes, quite a few. Acrylonitrile, butadiene are both on the carcinogen list, so we were under strict EPA guidelines. This was in Ohio, so we had state guidelines in Ohio to follow also.
And so you are familiar with working with and reviewing regulations as it relates to chemical compounds and their release as it relates to air quality and other issues. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you said you worked in the petrochemical industry for approximately 38 years?
Actually, only about 23 for petrochemicals. All the rest, all the other places I worked were account for the other time.
Okay, so 23 years in petrochemicals.
Yeah.
And can you tell me what petrochemicals are?
Chemicals derived from oil.
Okay.
I mean, I think Ms. Choke did a really good job with the distillation column. The styrene and butadiene come off further up there near Napa.
So as it relates to that, and before we get to that, I want to specifically talk about your experience. You said that you worked with Colgate. Did you also work with other chemical-based entities such as detergents?
Yeah, we made back before the phosphate ban, we made STP for Procter & Gamble. Also made the phosphoric acid for Coca-Cola and RC.
Okay.
That was in Augusta, Georgia. Coca-Cola's plant, our home office was in Atlanta.
Did you do any work on Tide?
On Tide?
Yes.
No, not Tide itself.
Okay.
We just supplied the raw ingredient for it.
Okay, so you supplied the raw ingredients. With respect to Roundup, what about Roundup?
Actually, we made a couple different kinds of Roundup in Fayetteville, and
And how can you tell the board what Roundup is?
I think everybody knows it's a herbicide. It's kind of a miracle product. I'm going to go kind of crazy. It was a real breakthrough. The two guys who came up with Roundup got kicked out of the office, and nobody wanted to talk to them, and somebody picked up on the idea, and it made Monsanto for a while.
Okay, but so it's a herbicide.
It's a herbicide.
And is it used? How is it used predominantly?
As vegetation control. I would say weed control, but vegetation control.
Is it used in, for example, agriculture?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and so you are familiar, based on the development of Roundup, with chemical components and how they affect agricultural interests. Is that correct?
Yes, had to for Roundup.
And with respect to the other products, for example, with respect to Colgate, you're certainly also, based on your education and experience, familiar with the compounds and the chemical compositions of the products that go into the makeup of toothpaste and how they affect the human body as well. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And is all of that part of your general education and knowledge?
Yes.
At this time, I'd like to tender Mr. Morris as an expert in chemical-related matters, because he is a chemical engineer with extensive experience.
Chemical-related matters?
Yes.
It's a little broad. What,
In other words, he is familiar with chemistry
And
chemical
chemicals.
compounds that are used specifically in the production of products, and is capable of providing testimony that the average person could not, as it relates to the chemical composition and the chemical application and effects, both on the human body and on agricultural interests, as it relates to as it relates to how they're used in the asphalt plant.
as it relates to the asphalt plant?
That's correct.
Is he knowledgeable about asphalt plants? I'm just trying to do it right here.
Let me ask you the question.
Okay.
Are you knowledgeable about chemical compositions and compounds?
Yes.
And are you knowledgeable about how those chemicals are transmitted, and how they affect, for example, the air?
Yes.
And are you knowledgeable as it relates to those processes that are utilized with respect to that in relation to, for example, the information provided by Ms. Choate?
Yes.
Okay, I will allow the designation as an expert in how chemically related products are related to this plant. Okay.
So, again, can you tell me what is asphalt?
It's as Ms. Choke said, it's the dredges from the distillation of crude oil. It is what's left. After you get all the goodie out, you got this sludge. And that's asphalt. It has no more value other than to put on the road.
And have you had the opportunity to review the presentation made by Ms. Choate?
I have.
And based on your review, and in your expert opinion, as it relates to chemical compounds and how they're transmitted, and the like, are there opinions that you want to disclose as it relates to the proposed asphalt plant in this particular case?
I have some comments. I don't think I don't
what are
think
your
they directly conflict with what she said. I've got some enhancements, I think, some areas that I think need to be discussed.
Okay, and can you tell me what those are?
I agree that if you lay a lump of charcoal on asphalt on the ground, it's not going to offend anybody unless you trip over it. Okay? Asphalt becomes a problem when you heat it. It becomes a problem when you're dropping it in the truck. It becomes a problem when you're putting it on the ground. I understand that there have been improvements since the data that I'm using, but I haven't seen it quantified anywhere. It's better, but better by how much? I don't know that. So the numbers that I've got are based on what North Carolina says.
So why don't we get into what you've done? Why don't you tell us about what you've done, and have you prepared a statement with respect to your opinions related to the proposed asphalt plant and your concerns related thereto?
Yes.
Okay, and is that statement dated April 17th, 2021?
Yes.
And is it directed to the Board of Adjustment for the town of Angier?
Yes.
And is it regarding the proposed special use application by David J. Honeycutt?
Yes.
And is it related to the property number 0673 -12 -058 0.00?
Yes.
Which is the property that's located off of Highway 210 North toward Lillington?
Yes.
Okay. And is this statement, which I'm marking as Exhibit E, a part of the basis for your opinions?
Yes.
Okay. If it please the board, I'd like to introduce Exhibit E.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to note, I think he testified that it contains a bunch of opinions until the questions are asked. We don't know that he's qualified to give the opinions that are in there based on what he's been received as an expert.
Yes.
I think it'd be better to let him testify to it, and then if he's qualified for those opinions, it can be admitted at that time.
Well, I think that as a practical matter, you previously admitted the exhibit and PowerPoint presentation of Ms. Cho prior to any questions being asked. So if we're going to be consistent, it would be my opinion that you're going to offer the same consistency to my client, to my expert witness.
I think it would be appropriate to allow him to introduce the exhibit into the evidence and then testify about it, and the board will give it whatever weight it deserves.
I agree.
There may be some opinions that are substantiated, there may be some that are not, but the board will give it the proper weight following the testimony.
I agree with what the attorney said.
Thank you. That's always a wise thing. So with respect to your testimony, have you reviewed the type of chemical emissions that are released in asphalt production?
I have.
And can you tell me about that?
Yes. I went to the North Carolina Department of Quality and pulled data from there. And what I found was that there are volatile organic compounds that come off. They're in small quantities for the most part, but they include acetylene, acrolein, formaldehyde, phenols, styrene, trichlorofluoromethane, methylchloroform, methyl ethyl ketone, toluene, xylene, methylene, N-hexane, carbon disulfide, dioxin, benzene, hydrogen sulfide, hydrochloric acid, and trichloroethylene. So that's a list of, according to North Carolina Department of Quality, what comes out of an asphalt plant.
And when you say Department of Quality, you're talking about the Department of Environmental Quality?
Environmental quality.
What is typically known as DEQ?
DEQ.
Right. Okay. Have you had the occasion to work with permitting issues during the course of your experience?
Yes.
You say that as, and so you're familiar with working with regulations in various communities in various states, is that correct?
Yes.
And with respect to that, are there particular issues associated with emissions from asphalt plants which caught your attention?
I think the one thing that caught my attention in going through the North Carolina data, Department of Quality, was sulfur dioxide and nitrous oxides from the combustion. Huge, well, let me change that. There are quantities that are extremely measurable coming off the combustion. The asphalt itself is a minor contributor. I do believe it's contained as well as she says. Just fugitive emissions. Fugitive emissions being, like I was saying, when you drop it into a truck, when it goes through and it leaks through a crack or something like that. That's a fugitive emission. But the big two, or the big three, formaldehyde's one that gets out in enough quantity. And the only reason I bring it up is because OSHA says 1/10 of a part per million, 1/10 of a part per million can cause irritation in the respiratory tract. That's according to OSHA. Sulfur dioxide, 5 parts per million according to OSHA is action limit on sulfur dioxide. That's another one that can cause respiratory problems. We're not talking about carcinogens and people dying as they walk down the street or drive by in their car. We're talking about things that'll make you feel bad. Nitrous oxide and sulfur dioxide are the big two that come out of the plant. And the primary problem is they're the basis for acid rain. Sulfur dioxide mixing with the water vapor in the air will give you sulfuric acid. It'll do it. Nitrous oxide, the one that they talk about coming out of cars, if you can imagine a heater that's, I don't even want to say, that will generate enough nitrous oxide to create ground ozone, according to the EPA. Ground ozone, not the one up in the sky, but the one on the ground. And nitrous oxide are active enough to actually cause smog. So we get there, and we also have another effect going on at the same time, the nitrous oxide mixing with the water vapor causing nitric acid. And so you've got two sources of acid rain, two sources for acid in rain. And the dew in the ground when you wake up in the morning and you walk on the wet grass, it's all there.
So in your opinion, based on your review of the standard levels of emission, but more importantly, based on your review of how this particular asphalt plant is proposed to be operated, do you have an opinion as to whether or not this plant will cause any public health concern? Yes, but he is is a chemical with all
It
due
doesn't
respect-
matter.
Hold on. With respect to his education, experience, and training, he has dealt with chemicals and the production of chemicals in such a way that he had to know the effects on humans as well as on plant life and agricultural interests, which are two things that were discussed previously in this case. And
Let me cut you short. You stated as how that they affect the human body, so I think I'll have to allow it.
I'm sorry.
You qualified him with how these chemicals affect the human body, so I'll have to allow it.
Okay. Go ahead.
Actually, where I was going, if you take Ms. Choke's diagram of emission control, and it does what we called incinerating the gaseous pollutants. What you do is you take the off gases, you run them back through your burner, and theoretically what you do is you destroy most of your your air pollution products. And if you go and you look at the dust collector, you see that the gases coming off of there go to atmosphere. Now what we're talking about is nitrous oxide, sulfur dioxide, and small amounts of volatile, whatever survives the incineration. But you've got nothing on the discharge side of the dust collector. So our major combustion pollutants are hitting the air. So I'm not gonna say that breathing sulfur dioxide and living in sulfuric acid and nitric acid is bad for you. I guess it could be good. I don't know, because I'm not a health expert. But it's not something that I would want to do myself.
And you wouldn't want to do it yourself based on what rationale?
Acid burns.
Acid burns?
Acid burns. It eats your car. All the things that we most of you aren't old enough. Some of us are old enough to remember when they first realized that pollution was causing acid rain. People's cars were just being eaten and they couldn't figure out why. Well, if you look at the amount of sulfur dioxide and nitrous oxides, they call them NOx, because there are so many variables in there, that what we're looking at is having that on a local basis. Having that on a local basis.
Would you agree that having sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxide or NOx, and formaldehyde being a byproduct of the production of asphalt could lead to adverse health effects, for example, to someone who lived adjacent to it who was prone to respiratory ailments?
Well, I mean, according to OSHA and the EPA, they're both respiratory irritants.
And so, would it be fair to say the fact that Ms. Carlotta Reyes and her father-in-law, Pedro Reyes Sr., live adjacent to the proposed site for the asphalt plant, that based on your review, that they would likely suffer some ill effects from the irritants, if you will, that were released?
At that location, I don't see how they could avoid it. There's just not enough distance for dilution to be the solution. That's something that we lived with in the 70s, thinking that if we got it high enough in the air or we put it deep enough in the water, it would dilute. and it'd be okay. And it's never okay. It'll eventually catch up with you.
So, do you have any additional testimony that you'd like to offer as it relates, to the proposed, site as it relates to emissions and, other issues?
I would like the board to consider that no matter how good you are, if you're adding pollutants to our community, no matter how small they are, you're adding. You're not making it better. You're not making the air our kids breathe and we breathe better. It's not going to be better if you put more in it. It's going to be worse. If you put one, or you put half, or you put a tenth more than you've got, it's worse.
Now, comment or questions were posed, for example, to Ms. Reyes as it relates to agricultural uses of, for example, pesticides or herbicides. Is there a distinction between pesticides and herbicide use in agricultural production and the release of compounds such as sulfur dioxide, NOxes, and formaldehyde and other VOCs when someone is living in close proximity to a asphalt plant?
The only comment I have on that is the asphalt plant will be running 5 days a week. If a farmer is spraying his crops, it's going to be a couple days, 3 days, 5 days a week. I don't know, 20 days a month. The asphalt plant's running. The farmer's not going to be spraying herbicides and pesticides 5 days a week, 20 days a month. And we didn't talk about how acid rain affects crops.
I was just going to ask you that.
Yeah.
Can you tell us how acid rain affects crops? And can you tell us also, will you talk about the aluminum compounds that affect soil?
Well, a lot of people don't realize aluminum is not just in beer cans, though I'm happy with that. It's in the ground. Acid rain tends to break the compounds down that have aluminum and free it up. That's not good for crops. It also binds or breaks down some of the nutrients and compounds in the soil. It's like Roundup. What the miracle of Roundup is, when it hits the soil, it hits enough minerals that it gets neutralized. That's the reason it's not permanent. So, unfortunately, acid rain, if you've got it, it just keeps coming.
Now, you keep
coming.
You keep referring to acid rain. Can you explain, are you saying that a byproduct of the production of asphalt is acid rain?
I'm not, let me say it this way, that in order to make asphalt, you need tremendous heaters to melt the asphalt, get it to temperature. Making that heat, you use fuel oil, natural gas. A byproduct of that combustion, just like in your cars, is going to be nitrous oxide, sulfur dioxide. They don't have catalytic converters on them to try to neutralize it. And I heard Ms. Choke say that she would gladly stand in the effluent stream from her dust collector. I wouldn't suck the air out of the exhaust of my car.
And are you saying that that's equivalent or?
I'm saying it's similar. Because you're combusting. You're talking about combustion gases.
Do you have an opinion as to, with respect to those combustion gases, do you have an opinion within which a plant such as an asphalt plant should be located with respect to location to residential uses?
This is a true opinion. You can have a field day with this one. Because in order to give you an accurate number, I have to have dispersion models. I have to know the height of the tower and the normal weather conditions at any given time. But it would not be, as it stands now, not anything less than a mile away. Nobody should be living there less than a mile away.
Okay. Now, are you familiar with the site where the proposed asphalt plant is located?
Yes, I am.
And does your opinion change knowing where the site is and knowing, I'm assuming you know what other uses are in the area?
Yes.
Okay. And with respect to that, would your opinion change with respect to the mile radius, knowing that there are other light industrial businesses in the area?
No, it wouldn't.
To your knowledge, are there any other businesses in the area that would have the intensity of use as it relates to, for example, chemical components that would be emitted in the air?
No.
Now, one other question. I think there was some concern raised by some of the witnesses with respect to odor. Are any of the elements that are released or compounds that are released, do they create an odor?
Yes.
So, for example, does sulfur dioxide create an odor?
Yes, it does, but with the water vapor in the air, it goes to sulfuric acid.
Okay.
Pretty quick.
Okay. And what does that mean?
That means that you're not going to smell it very much.
Okay.
The nitrous oxide, maybe because it'll mix with volatile hydrocarbons, not only from the plant, but in our general atmosphere, might cause smog and cause some irritation. You see a light fog as you go through on some mornings, particularly, when it's really nice in July and the humidity is like 80%, and you pass by this plant and you go, oh. Because, it's not going anywhere. We don't have the beautiful breeze we had today. And we've got all that moisture. It's a beautiful dry day today. And it's a perfect day to talk about. It's not a problem. The problem days are going to be in the summer with the humidity and the wind's not blowing very hard. That's when the problems hit.
So there will be odors that will be emitted from the release of those.
I think the fugitive emissions alone, and, you know, we talked about fugitives a couple times, you're gonna pick those up. If they're loading whatever trucks, 10 trucks a day, 5 trucks, you're gonna get something from 5 trucks a day that particularly Ms. Reyes will smell. She'll know every time they load a truck.
All right, I have no further questions. Is there anything else? Don't sit down.
Oh, I wasn't gonna sit down, I was gonna wait for him.
Okay, is there anything else that you want to say?
No, I've pretty much said it,
All right, Mr.
what I
Pope.
wanna say.
Does the board have any questions?
I'm a little light on hearing, so I'm gonna step up a little bit.
Mr. Norris, I'm familiar with Wheeler Road. I respect your qualifications here. I know you probably live more than a mile away.
Yeah.
So your recommendation is putting it a mile away, at least a mile away, because you're not familiar with, you know, all the heights and all of that. Did you know Ms. Reyes?
Not before this.
I'm familiar with a lot of the terms you're using now.
Mhm.
It's not easy, but, okay, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Mr. Pope?
Thank you, sir. When you were,
I'm gonna clean it up for you there, there you go.
That's okay. I think when you were given testimony as to your qualifications as a chemical engineer, you indicated that some of the data that you used in forming these opinions was dated and there might be newer technology. Can you expand upon that?
Just what Ms. Choke said, that things are better now. I don't know how. I think that's an opinion that they're better. I don't know. Do you have data?
No, I was asking about the data that you relied upon. I think you said that it was somewhat dated.
I relied on North Carolina data, which is all I have. If you have more relevant data, I'll gladly look at it.
I just want to know about the data that you relied upon.
It's the data that was available.
Okay, and let's describe what that was.
North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality.
So all the information that is contained in Exhibit E, you got off the webpage for the Department of Environmental Quality?
Yes.
So.
Except for the data that says EPA or OSHA, I got from North Carolina.
Okay, where in North Carolina?
Where in North Carolina?
Where did you get, it would appear that most of what you have stated in Exhibit E here, you have attributed to some other source, such as the EPA, OSHA. I just want to know where you got this information that you included in this report.
The data came from North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality.
Okay.
I went to OSHA to find exposure limits.
Okay. All right. So, the information that you have included in Exhibit E regarding the types of chemical emissions from an average asphalt plant in North Carolina, you have attributed to the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And do you have any specific information regarding the particular asphalt plant that the applicant proposes to put on this property?
I could not find data for that.
Okay. And the chemicals that you listed here in Exhibit E that you got from the Department of Environmental Quality is just a general listing. Is that correct?
Oh, that is absolutely correct.
It doesn't provide any information as to particular amounts that are emitted. Is that correct?
Say that again.
Your Exhibit E, when you listed the chemicals that you have attributed to the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality as being emitted by the average asphalt plant, doesn't include any quantities as to those emissions, does it?
That's correct.
What asphalt plants have you been to measure emissions?
Only the ones that North Carolina has permits for. I've done them online.
No, have you physically ever been to an asphalt plant and taken any measurements on emissions?
No, I haven't.
I'll allow it.
And is there anything in your statement that you submitted as Exhibit E that provides any data regarding emissions in North Carolina from asphalt plants?
Can you rephrase that question?
Sure. Can you show me where in Exhibit E that you provided any data as to the quantity of emissions for the chemicals that you have stated from the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality?
Actually, I talked about 3. Sulfur dioxide is from the North Carolina quality, formaldehyde is, and nitrous oxide is.
Okay. Yes, and so let's take each one of those individually. Why don't you take sulfur dioxide? What data do you cite as to what kind of sulfur dioxide measurements come from the average asphalt plant in North Carolina?
Only what I got from the Department of Environmental Quality.
And that was what? 2 parts per billion, 100 parts per million? What's the measurement?
Sulfur dioxide is based on how much fuel is burned in million BTUs. That calculation came from North Carolina.
Okay. And that calculation is what?
The calculation is 2.3 pounds per hour per million BTUs.
Okay. And explain to the board what that means in the context of the operation of an asphalt plant as to how much sulfur dioxide it will be emitted from its operation.
What that says is you emit 2.3 pounds of sulfur dioxide per hour per million BTUs that's burned. Let me rephrase that. Per million BTUs generated in the asphalt plant. So if the burner in the asphalt plant is, I got here as an example, 30 million BTUs an hour, which is kind of on the small side, because the ones I was looking at were 50 million. I'm a conservative guy, I don't need to brag. It's 69 pounds an hour. So if you've got a bigger plant, you're making more, you'll generate more. Like I say, 30 million's on the small side of what I looked at.
Well, you mentioned what things that you were looking at regarding, I don't see that in Exhibit E. Do you have other information of what you took into consideration in forming these opinions?
I got calculations, I don't have opinions.
Are there calculations separate from Exhibit E?
Calculations are in Exhibit E.
Okay. And in Exhibit E, as it relates to sulfur dioxide, you make a generalized statement that people with asthma, particularly children, are sensitive to these effects of sulfur dioxide. Is that correct?
Nope. The EPA said that.
No.
I didn't make that statement.
Well, that was going to be my next question. You don't have any independent knowledge of that. That's just something you have attributed to the EPA, correct?
Are you asking, did I get this off the EPA's website? The answer is yes.
And that statement doesn't include any quantities as to what of sulfur dioxide could cause issues for sensitive populations with asthma, does it?
No, it doesn't. I have one for formaldehyde, though.
Yep. Let's talk about that next. So your next one is formaldehyde, airborne concentrations above point ppm. Tell the board what ppm is.
Parts per million.
Can cause irritation of the respiratory tract. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you attribute that to OSHA, correct?
Correct.
You don't have any independent knowledge or experience that formaldehyde can cause irritation. You're just basing that on your research on the OSHA, correct?
I don't have knowledge of 0.1. I have personal knowledge of more, like 1 part per million. Formaldehyde is a byproduct of making Roundup.
And where in Exhibit E where it talks about the measurement of formaldehyde that is emitted by the average asphalt plant in North Carolina.
The 0.5 pounds per hour is from the North Carolina.
What this says is formaldehyde airborne concentrations of 0.5 pounds per hour. It doesn't say that comes from an asphalt plant, and it's not attributed to the Department of Environmental Quality, is it?
Say that first part again.
Okay, you've made a blanket statement in Exhibit E regarding 0.5 pounds an hour of formaldehyde. You attribute it to OSHA. It doesn't say anything about being attributed to an average asphalt plant in the state of North Carolina, does it?
It says 0.1 parts per million can cause irritation in the respiratory tract. OSHA fact sheet. The 0.5 comes from North Carolina.
It doesn't say that an asphalt plant produces 0.5 pounds an hour of formaldehyde, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Let's talk about nitrogen oxides. So your whole paragraph that you've written in there is attributable to EPA basic information about nitrous oxides. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is there anything contained in that next paragraph that indicates measurements regarding the emissions of nitrogen oxides from the average asphalt plant in the state of North Carolina?
No.
So next paragraph, I think, is when you get into talk about the development of acid rain. Is that correct?
I don't know which next paragraph
I'm
you're
sorry,
looking at.
you look at starting with the one that says these emissions can have a devastating impact. Is that
Yeah.
okay? Does that paragraph talk about acid rain?
Yes.
Does that paragraph or anywhere else in Exhibit E provide any measurements as to the VOCs that you testify to in there that could produce acid rain?
The VOCs cause smog.
Okay. How about the NOx and the SO2? Is that what causes acid rain?
Yes.
And is there anything in that paragraph or anywhere else in Exhibit E that provides testimony as to the necessary amounts of those chemicals to produce acid rain?
You don't need a necessary amount. You need those chemicals.
So
Those chemicals will react with water and make acid.
so any emissions of those chemicals is automatically going to turn into acid rain?
Yes.
And what other types? So every vehicle emission is creating acid rain in America?
Oh, yeah. That's the reason you have catalytic converters.
Is there any, let's move to the next paragraph, which would be, as I mentioned earlier about acid rain, seems that you have attributed that to an EPA plant response to air pollution. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That information is not independent information that you've developed on your own. That's something you got off of an EPA website?
Yes, that's correct.
And the opinions that you've expressed in here about health, other than your education and work experience as a chemical engineer with toothpaste and Roundup and other such type chemicals, you don't have any education or training in medicine, do you?
No, I don't.
And you don't have any personal knowledge regarding the opinions that you've expressed as to the health effects that any of this could have on any person other than what you've taken from the EPA and OSHA and the Department of Environmental Quality.
That is correct.
And you're aware that the Department of Environmental Quality is who issues permits that allow the operation of asphalt plants?
Say that first part.
You are aware that the Department of Environmental Quality is who issues a permit that allows for the operation of an asphalt plant?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And you're aware as a part of that process, as you heard Ms. Choate testify to earlier, that they consider air quality and other environmental issues and don't issue a permit if they believe that things exceed safe levels for the workers and adjacent properties. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's all the questions I have at this time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. Any rebuttal?
Is it standard in the area of chemical engineering to rely on data provided by the United States United States Environmental Protection Agency?
In my career, the state also relies on OSHA and EPA for guideline. So to answer your question, it's standard practice for us, chemical engineers working in the chemical industry, to refer to the state or the federal guidelines and what we're doing.
And so when you look at those standards, and for example, where in your report, EPA says that X chemical may be an irritant or may cause respiratory problems, that is based on EPA's analysis. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And as a chemical engineer, do you rely on that analysis?
Yes, I do.
Because
Always have.
And that analysis helps you in formulating opinions as it relates to what effects the chemicals that are emitted will have on humans or plant life or other entities that are being reviewed.
That is correct.
Now, in Mrs. Choate's presentation, did you see any information related to emissions?
No. I heard they were much better.
You heard they were much better.
Yeah.
But there's no evidence that has been provided by the applicant with respect to that, is there?
Not that I have seen.
And with respect to the processes that they discussed, as it relates to how the plant will operate, did any of those processes address the fugitive emissions?
I didn't see it. I did not see it.
Okay, so that was not a part of the applicant's presentation?
Not that I saw.
And one of the primary concerns that you discussed in your report is the concerns related to fugitive emissions. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And so there's nothing that the applicant has provided is there anything that the applicant has provided that just would change your opinion with respect to fugitive emissions?
As I go through the slide presentation, I didn't see anything.
And for the most part, did you dispute, for example, some of the cleaning processes that the applicant disclosed? Their efficacy?
I'm not following.
In other words, you said earlier in your testimony that there was a lot that the applicant disclosed that you agreed with. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But in looking at what was agreed to, that was disclosed, there were also issues that were not discussed or disclosed, correct?
Correct.
And for example, one of those issues being the fugitive emissions. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Not any other questions?
Any questions from the board?
Like I said, I'm a little slow on hearing, so I have to move
Okay.
up.
Any questions from the board?
I have one. Just clarify something maybe that you said earlier, that you said there was more pollutants comes from dropping the asphalt into the truck, and then the truck hauling it down the road, where it drops onto the surface that's gonna be paved. Did I misunderstand you on that?
I said fugitive emissions that we would detect, for example, would be dropping the mix in the truck and when they pave the road.
Odor-wise.
Yeah.
The contaminants.
Yeah.
Contaminants
Correct.
of air that we would smell.
Yeah.
So you're talking about stuff that's up in the air that's diluted.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I just want to clarify that, because I just want to know if we need to just quit using asphalt altogether.
Okay, is that it? All right, you're suggesting we have a 5-minute break? Okay, without objection, we'll have a 5-minute break. We'll be back at 11:20.